This is the Inner Chief Podcast, episode 371.
I think to win their hearts and minds, you have to have a compelling vision or a compelling proposition to offer them, and you have to sell it to them. And if you sell the proposition to them, you can then sell the journey to them. And if you can sell the journey to them, you can grab their heart. My job becomes really easy then. My job is to set them up for success because I've already won them over. The convincing has been done at the front, rather than you wait until you hit the difficult points in a program or a delivery of something and people are questioning whether their heart is in this or not. So it's almost like you bring forward emotional connection to the beginning and then you trade on that emotional connection all the way through.
G'day, this is the Inner Chief Podcast, episode 371 with George Hunt, former CIO of the Year, on winning hearts and minds, technology as a strategy, and the little things of leadership. I am your host, Greg Layton, founder of Chiefmaker and the Council of Chiefs. I believe there is a great chief in all of us, and that through listening to the stories, strategies, and techniques of great CEOs and gurus, each of you can find and leave your own legacy through your work and life. The Inner Chief Podcast is where you will learn how to think and make moves like a CEO, like a true chief. For over a decade, I've helped CEOs and senior executives around the world boldly lead change, inspire their people, and leave a legacy. On the Inner Chief Podcast, I bring these stories to life with deep diving CEO interviews, interspersed with minisodes covering key leadership challenges, so you will find your own path to greatness as an executive. In this episode, Chief, I replay a chat I had with George Hunt in 2019. At the time, George was the Chief Information Officer of Sydney Water. Now he is currently the Chief Strategy Officer of Smart Energy Water in the UK, a role he has held since November 2020. George is a recognised technology leader within the global utility sector. He's also held roles as global consulting partner at Wipro Digital in the UK and was a CIO of Wessex Water. He's a Bachelor of Engineering from Birmingham University and a Master of Information Systems from Kingston University in London, and was awarded the prestigious CIO of the Year in 2018. In this masterclass, George will share how to win the hearts and minds of your people and aligning to achieve a vision. Why technology has evolved to become a key strategy for most organisations, some great analogies for leading a business through rapid change, and the little things of leadership like the power of goodwill. Chiefs, without further ado, let's hear from our best of guest, George Hunt. Righto, here we are with CIO of the Year and CIO of Sydney Water, George Hunt. George, welcome to the Inner Chief Podcast.
Cheers, Greg. It's great to be here.
Mate, now, you have had a wonderful career working across, three continents, and a stellar career in tech. We're going to talk all about what it means to lead technical professionals, how to work with the technology department, how to make a difference in this world that's very, very fast moving. But I want to start, as always, with a bit of who you are and where you come from. So tell us, what's a story that sums up your childhood and early years?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So I knew this question was coming. I gave it a little bit of thought. So I had a really normal childhood. I had fantastic parents, working class family. My dad was a truck driver. My mum stayed at home, suffered with a lot of illness, so that kind of defined my childhood a little bit. First big moment in my life was I fractured my skull at the age of 8. Got hit by a mod on a motor scooter.
Oh, wow.
Hit my head on the curb, fractured my skull. So that was good. I had 5 months off school, but that was a very clear memory in my mind.
Wow.
Just as an individual, I used to like making things. I don't see it much, but things like Meccano were a big thing when I was a kid.
Sure,
Lego,
yeah.
Particularly Meccano because of the metal. But yeah, I love making things. School, love school. I was quite a good kid at school. I liked sport a lot. I had a lot of responsibility. Most influential teacher was my maths teacher. Don't know why he had an influence on me, but looking back, you realise, when you are at school, some of these people do shape who you are. He was so encouraging. He encouraged 2 or 3 of us to take our maths O-level early, a year early. because he had faith in us and said, at least see what you get. And we all got A's, which was interesting. So that was a defining moment. But I think the most defining moment of my childhood is around the age of 10, I joined the local rowing club. And I was just invited down there because my mate's parents were saying, they were looking for coxes, young kids that could be part of this sport. And rowing was so far from my background. It was at that time, it's very elitist, very professional, lots of public school kids, and so far from my background. But I can't begin to tell you how it changed my life. I suddenly found myself in a situation where I was surrounded by professional people that had achieved a lot, doctors, lawyers, accountants, really professional people who were both driven in their working world, but also driven in the sporting sense as well. And I also found myself surrounded by other kids. As I went through from being a cox to being rowing at about the age of 13, who started to row, suddenly found myself mixing with public school kids who had very high aspirations, people that were obviously gearing themselves up to go to university, and that couldn't have been further from where I was at that point in time.
Mm. And in the UK, public school is the equivalent of a private school here, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Just to clarify.
So I went to what was classed as a comprehensive school, which is just a very normal school for very, very normal families. But I found myself mixing with public or private school kids, public school as they're defined there, and also grammar school kids. And they rubbed off on me in a way that I can't even begin to explain, other than they changed my aspirations. They changed what I wanted out of life. They changed what trajectory I wanted to go on. Anyway, so I kind of finished school at 16, and because of this impact, I wanted to go to college. I wanted to go and do my A-levels and go on to university, but I sat down, I remember really clearly, I sat down, spoke to my mum, and she said, look, I hear you, but you've got to bring some money in the house. You've got to help run this house. You live here, you've got to make a contribution. And I'd always had a job through this time as a paper boy. I'd always got up early, done the hard round in the morning and done the same in the evening. And she said, no, I need you to go and find a job, and bring some money in. And I don't mind what you do after that, but I want you to make a contribution. So back to the school, as I say, it's a very normal school, seeking some career advice. And the general advice from the school was, here are some forms, fill them in, see what happens. And the forms were for apprenticeships at the local engineering companies. So I filled them in and actually got offered apprenticeships. So I obviously had something that caught their attention, and I was interested in making things. So I chose a company out of those 4 that made the most interesting products. They weren't the highest payer by any stretch, but this company I chose was a company called Food Engineering, and anybody that's done any physics or fluid dynamics might recognise the food number, and it's to do with drag through water. Anyway, this company made dynamometers. They made engine and vehicle test rigs. And what really caught my attention about it was they were building test rigs for the Concorde engine. They were building test rigs for Formula One.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah. So it was really interesting engineering, and it was engineering coupled with technology as well. So there's obviously something latent in there that I was interested in. I started my 4-year apprenticeship. First year was amazing. I bought myself a motorbike, much to my mum's concern, a fairly fast motorbike. And in the first year, there was about 20-odd different apprentices, and we were allowed to work on our bikes. It was just a dream. And after that, I spent the next 3 years going around the factory, working out what I wanted to do. And towards the end of my 4-year apprenticeship, I was offered a job working in a design office, which for most people would be a dream. Would have been the actual sort of conclusion of a 4-year apprenticeship. You get a job in the design office in a really interesting engineering company. But for whatever reason, that wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough. My whole life expectations had been set by my new peer group around the rowing club. And we'd been rowing quite successfully as a junior 4. And actually, we did really well rowing internationally and also at all sorts of levels. But one of our team actually went on and rowed in the Seoul Olympics. So we were racing at a high level. But they'd completely changed my worldview, my perspective, and my aspirations. And so I said to the company, I don't really want that job in the design office. Will you sponsor me to go to university, do an engineering degree? Sadly, my mum had passed away by that point, so, I was making decisions for myself. to a large extent. But they said, well, okay then. And I became their first sponsored engineering student. And I went to Birmingham University in the UK, which is a good university, and did an engineering degree. So I was really proud of myself for picking myself up and taking myself on that trajectory. And it completely changed my world at that point. That was probably one of the first really defining moments in my working life. And it was the point where I really got interested in technology. My final year project in that 3 years was, for those that are listening to this that are old enough to know what a mini metro is, my job was to program the welding robots that welded the front end of a mini metro for British Leyland. And that was just fabulous. You know, it was real at the cutting edge at that time of engineering and computing coming together, or computer-aided manufacturing coming together. And I'll never forget that. And I also did some work with Jaguar and Morgan cars in that time.
Nice.
As well. And that set me on a trajectory which has carried me to this day, really.
Wow, what a cool start. What a really cool start. Now, you had your motorbike, but what was your first ever car?
Yeah, so it broke my heart. Like most people my age, met a girl, fell in love, all that kind of stuff. Didn't like getting cold on the back of my bike. So I sold my beautiful motorbike.
What was the motorbike?
It was actually a Honda Super Dream first, and then I went to a Honda 750 quite quickly after that. So it was a rocket ship bike. Yeah. But so I sold my motorbike for a Ford Capri. Ford Capri Mark 1 Series 2, and the Series 2 part is important here. So it was a Mark 1, but it had a Series 2 interior, which made it look really cool. I described the colour as cappuccino. So if you imagine white with lots of brown patches.
Yes. Sprinkles.
Sprinkles.
Yeah.
Then that was really what it was like.
Got.
But it was fab. It was warm, and it was my first car. But then
Nice.
I switched quite quickly to another car, which was my favourite car of all time, which was a Ford Cortina 2-litre GT. So basically, Life on Mars. You know the program Life on Mars?
Yes. Yeah.
The car that Gene Hunt had on Life on Mars. That was the car I had, and it was just fabulous.
Oh, wow. Good start. We've got a good car heritage anyway. Okay, now let's talk about your career, because that's where you started out in engineering, but now you've had multiple CIO roles around the world. I want to talk to you a bit about you first before we talk about other technical professionals. What has been do you think, the secret sauce within you that's made you successful over that time?
I think the first thing I would say is the genuine interest in how applied technology can make a difference. Yeah. The welding experience with the welding robots was a good example of technology aiding manufacturing. So I left university and got another job programming machine tools to produce things. So that first thing I would say was a genuine interest. The second thing is, and I'll talk a little bit about a few of my other jobs in a moment, but I learned quite quickly the power of learning how to advise and influence as opposed to tell. You know, and I'll talk a little bit about it, but I refined some of that experience when I worked as a consultant in later life.
We better talk about what the time you had as a consultant, because that's flipping the role, so to speak, from internal to external.
So after I left university, I went back to that company for a little while and stayed there for a few years. Realised that it became not enough, so I wanted to find another challenge. I joined Petrofina, which was the Belgian oil company, Fina, F-I-N-A. Doesn't exist anymore because it was acquired by Total. But I worked for this amazing guy called John Wolfe, who's sadly passed away now. But he was one of two people in my life that has been truly inspiring to me and made me realise the power of working with people and getting things done with people rather than a more traditional sort of management approach where you tell people what to do. It gets you so far, but it really doesn't break through. Yep. So they taught me, or John Wolfe in particular, taught me a huge amount about the power of goodwill, the power of investing in people so that they believe in what they're doing. So the two things that shaped me at that time were certainly a real interest in what I was doing. I wasn't a techie geek or anything, but I was really interested in what technology could do. But equally, I suddenly realised that people are the secret sauce, and if you can get a team to work for you, with you, alongside you, and they believe in where you're trying to go, you can achieve huge things. And I've carried those two things right into my life today. You mentioned consulting. I learned so much in that working for Petrofina that I started to work with other big oil companies, BP, Shell, Texaco. And it gave me a taste of I could make a difference on a bigger scale. And I was really drawn into that. So we're talking about 1999 at this point, just before year 2000. And I thought, I really like this idea of consulting and making a difference and working with lots of companies. I had a little period of time where I carried on as a consultant, but I knew at that point I was looking around for something. And one of the people that I'd worked for as a consultant was the Chief Operating Officer of Thames Water, a guy I really respect. Well, I'd done some good work for him, so he saw me in reasonably good light, and he knew that I was probably looking for a challenge. Now, this guy in particular, he had been the Chief Operating Officer of Thames Water. Thames Water at the time was owned by a German company called RWE, and RWE were on a growth trajectory in water. They wanted to build a water division, so they bought Thames Water, and they also bought American Water, and they'd approached the guy I was talking about and asked him if he would be president of the water division. So that included Thames Water and American Water. And he wanted somebody to join them that understood about technology, but understood how technology could transform an organisation. So I got this role, which was a fabulous role, which was really about how do we transform the organisation based on the disruption that technology can bring along, because Thames Water was a fairly traditional organisation at that point, but it knew that it needed to make another step. So I got invited to be arguably the CTO of Thames Water and American Water, working for this guy. And that was a fabulous period of my life. I spent most of my time travelling between London, Philadelphia and Dusseldorf, which is where RWE's headquarters were. And I learned an awful lot about how you are on the inside, but you're not in operational delivery. So I had to apply those consulting and advisory and influencing skills that I'd learnt as a consultant, but on the inside. Yeah, and I found that really challenging. Or it was a challenge, but I found it really inspiring that you could achieve so much without any management control over people. You could just win their hearts and minds.
Sure.
And the rest is fairly easy once you won their hearts and minds.
Now, Chief, has your career or personal growth stalled? Are you overloaded with work and commitments that make it impossible to stay in front of the game? Or are you constantly fighting soul-destroying internal politics and bureaucracy, and you just want to get things done? Well, the Chief Maker 5-step great method outlined in my book, which managed to get Amazon bestseller status, is a roadmap for any senior leader or manager who wants to rise above the politics and overload of the corporate world and master their profession. It's a 5-step process to get on the executive team if that's what you're looking for. Of course, Chief, if you just want to have more influence, more clarity, improved confidence at work, and be sure you're on the right path in your career, essentially a career strategy and roadmap, then get a copy of the book. Just go to chiefmaker.com/book and you can order your free copy where all you'll pay is the shipping. You'll learn a whole bunch of frameworks that I've elicited from so many of the great chiefs that have been on this show and through over a decade coaching senior executives from all over the world. So, how do you win their hearts and minds, George?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I wish I had a really slick answer that I could share with everybody, but...
It doesn't have to be slick, because you've already got results.
I think to win their hearts and minds, you have to have a compelling vision or a compelling proposition to offer them, and you have to sell it to them. And if you sell the proposition to them, you can then sell the journey to them. And if you can sell the journey to them, you can grab their heart. And then my job becomes really easy then. My job is to set them up for success because I've already won them over. The convincing has been done at the front rather than you wait until you hit the difficult points in a program or delivery of something and people are questioning whether their heart is in this or not. Yeah. So it's almost like you bring forward emotional connection to the beginning and then you trade on that emotional connection all the way through. And I've done a lot of that in my current role, which we'll talk about in a few moments, I'm sure.
And isn't that the truth? And so many people, because technology, and just about all technology work is about change, right? Because you're constantly introducing new tech. And because of the nature of the industry, I think people forget just to add in what the vision is and what the journey is going to be and what the benefits are and what it's going to be like at the end and to properly sell it, because it happens all the time. And because they skip that step, they don't get their hearts and minds.
That's right. I also think the way that you market the proposition is important. I love a good analogy. I use it every day of my life, or a good story.
Yeah.
You know, in order to just help people understand what we're trying to ask them to do. But I think that's a big part, that storytelling, that marketing, that sort of, you know, how do you convince somebody to climb a mountain?
Sure.
You know, what is I've always been interested in the power of goodwill or the power of discretionary effort. And I kind of think, how do you unlock that discretionary effort? So why do people climb a mountain? Why did you take on the challenges in your life that you took on? Not just because they're there. There must have been something that compelled you to do it. And that's a powerful lever in an organisation, which is if you win the hearts and minds, the rest is relatively easy. If you don't win the hearts and minds, you know, it's really difficult to recover. And especially when you hit the tough times, you've got nothing in the bank to trade on. No credibility, no goodwill credit that you can trade on when the going gets tough.
And it will get tough because when you climb a mountain, you know, the very nature of it is that it's difficult.
Yeah,
right?
so when you hit those dark moments, I've ran the London Marathon twice, so I've hit the wall twice.
Yeah, right.
And I kind of, you know, I was a lot younger, but I remember thinking, looking back on it, what was it that made me go through that moment around the 20-odd mile mark? What is it that makes you go through those tough moments? And it's probably because I've got this thing in my head of what it'll feel like to get over the finish line. Something is pulling me forward, whereas I could have found 100 reasons to stop.
Well, your brain would have been giving you every single one of them, right?
That's
That's
right.
what happens at the 20-mile mark.
That's right.
Somewhere between 30 and 35 kilometres, the brain decides, okay, I've had enough. I'm going to just make a list of all the reasons that you should stop running. And if you don't have what it's going to feel like at the end or the whole purpose for doing it, you will fail.
You will.
Right? And that's a perfect analogy for business because nothing worth doing in business is short of a marathon. Right? All transformations take years, or if they're a decent transformation of any sort. And so you have to have the purpose within your blood and you've got to know what the outcome's going to look like and feel like. As you know, we both agree that there's too many transformations go on without, you know, eliciting or explaining what it's going to be like and making that sale from the very beginning.
No, I'm completely with you. And so I think, you know, your question was, what is it that you have to do to win the hearts and minds? Is you have to try and impose that feeling of what it'll be like to be successful and achieve the outcome. And if you do that, then I think you really do unlock all of the magic ingredients that allow a program or a transformation or an outcome to be achieved.
Spoke about loving analogy and stories. Do you have any go-to analogies or stories that you just love?
Technology is difficult. Introducing new technology into a live organisation is tough, and we've all read the press about how many successful IT transformation programs there are out there, and you try and dissect. So what's made some programs more successful than others? So you know, in my current role, I get called the king of analogies quite often by people I care about and a lot of people around me. But the one I trade on lots of analogies, but the one I seem to use quite a lot, and I know it's working because I hear other people use it. In fact, there are two. I'll give you a brief explanation of two, but the one I use quite a lot, I've got a big focus in my current role around a large program. The way I describe it is we're trying to upgrade an aircraft whilst it's in flight. Okay, so, and it's such a significant program that it's effectively like changing one of the engines whilst it's in flight. And it just allows people to understand the risk profile around what we're doing. So if we're trying to change an engine whilst it's in flight, we better make sure the other engine is sound. We better make sure that we don't introduce too much additional change in the way the pilot is flying the thing, the other components of the
wing
aircraft.
structure.
Yeah.
Don't change the wheels, for God's sake.
That's right. So if we try and change too much on an aircraft that's in flight, then we're introducing risk to the organisation. And it's not just project risk, it's really corporate risk or reputational risk if the aircraft doesn't keep flying. So I use that analogy quite a lot to say, you know, we're upgrading the aircraft. If we're going to change one of the engines, let's not try and change the other engine at the same time because you're going to be a glider for a while. How do you feel about that?
Yes.
And I like to say...
How do the passengers feel about that?
Yeah. So I like to describe it in the way of, this is what you're asking me to do in the context of upgrading an aircraft whilst it's in flight. And if the response is, but you still need to do it, then I basically say, here's the risk. How do you feel about the risk? And it does change the narrative from just do it to I now understand why we've got to be, we've got to be cautious and about understanding what we're doing. So I use that one quite a lot. The other one that I really like, and it's a little bit linked to your question about how do you win the hearts and minds. Years ago, somebody told me a story, and a lot of people listening to this will have heard it, but a story of JFK walking around NASA in the 60s, comes across this guy who's sweeping the corridor, and he asks him, "What's your job?" And he says, "I'm helping to get a man on the moon." Okay, and it just makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up whenever I say that, which is there was a clear mission. Regardless of whatever your role is, whatever your contribution is, there was a clear mission towards achieving an outcome or supporting an outcome. So I've always been very conscious of how do we make sure everybody understands what their contribution is to achieving an outcome, no matter how big or small. That's another part of my heart is in it because I understand my contribution. It's not just a case of I'm doing my job, I'm going home with my paycheck.
Yeah.
I think you've got to understand what your contribution is. So I do work on that quite hard.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful analogy because, I often use an analogy from elite sport, and I'll say when a football team or a netball team or any sport, they take the field, everybody has a positional number and a very, very clear job. And there's an outcome, score goals or score tries or whatever the sport you're playing is. Business, often we are happy to have all sorts of people playing that they don't particularly have roles or particular job, and as a result, they sort of run around a bit lost. And they don't contribute to scoring the goals because they don't know what job they've got to do.
Yeah.
And if you can give them that clarity, that's enough for most people, right?
I can't begin to explain how much I agree with what you just said. One of my challenges in my current role was we had a number of folk that were used to sitting in the grandstand criticising the play on the field, and I thought that's just too lazy. Yeah. You've either got a position on the field and you know what your role is. So the way I set up some of the things that we're doing right now is rather than having two teams on the pitch, people sitting in the grandstand, I basically said there's one pitch, one team, one objective, and no grandstands. So there was nowhere for people to sit because this grandstanding behaviour is a challenge to us. Yeah. It's a challenge. And it comes from a good place and a good intent, but it makes no contribution to the outcome whatsoever. So if you've got a point of view, get on the pitch.
It doesn't get you to the moon, right?
Yeah, that's right. So, that works really well in my current role is remove the grandstands and make sure that everybody that wants to be part of this is making a contribution to the outcome and not just sitting back and saying you missed a bit.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's just a little bit too lazy and doesn't achieve an outcome.
It's too easy. Okay, what about, have you ever had any feedback in your career that was stinging, and only stinging because you knew it to be true, that has shaped you significantly?
When I was working for the owner of Thames Water and American Water, there was definitely some feedback at that point that I received quite quickly, which is, who are you and why are you here? And I couldn't say I'm from head office and I'm here to help you. It just wouldn't carry.
Sure.
And so the feedback was, make sure you're relevant and I'll give you time. If you're not relevant, I will not give you time. And that word relevancy has stuck in my mind ever since.
What do you mean by relevant or relevancy?
So relevancy for me is you've got to add some value or you've got to make a contribution. Now, I've been in a situation where people have asked for my time in my diary and they come and talk to you about something that they want. And if I don't understand why it's important or why it's necessary, then I kind of question why is it relevant to me. So if I now put myself in a position where I'm leading a team of people, if my team isn't relevant or the contribution of the individuals or contribution of the team isn't relevant, then I don't have a play. I don't have a role or a contribution to make. So I'm constantly challenging my current team in particular to stay relevant. Otherwise, irrelevancy will actually cause them to become extinct.
Yeah, and so it comes down to value. Like, are you valuable in the current agenda of the business?
And technology is an interesting arena because depending on your point of view, technologies could just be outsourced and dismissed as I'll buy it as a service, I'll buy it off the shelf from somebody else. Or the technology groups could be you're fundamental to the future of this company and the way you start to define the direction in which the company is going. And that's really a choice for most CIOs, is to say, which side of that fence do I think I want to be? And I know where I want to be. I want to be on the side where we're making a contribution, we're relevant in the future, but we're also open-minded about how to change and stay relevant, rather than just be in the past of we keep machines going, keep the lights on, because it's more than that.
Yeah, I think this takes me to a question actually around what is the future of the technology department? Because you go back 20 years and it was just a service provider that put a computer on a desk, gave you a new phone or something, but now it's at the core of so many. And I think the 5 top most valuable companies on the planet are all tech companies.
Yeah.
Right, so that's just transformed from the old days. What's the next phase for tech?
Well, I think that if I reflect on my time in technology, when I was at Petrofina, I was very much in a role where your job is to keep the lights on.
Yes.
Okay, that was your job. And I was fine with that. What I found is that through the maturity of technology and through the different roles I've had, is that rather than just being an IT an enabling function, you become a partnering function. But the future is you technology or digital, everything digital, will actually start to define the strategy of a lot of organisations. Yes. Even Sydney Water, the idea of how do you compare what Sydney Water 2.0 might look like compared to Sydney Water 1.0? I could be fairly critical of, we focus a lot on being Sydney Water 1.0, but actually what we're doing is putting a digital veneer on an analogue business in some areas. There's a few things we've done where we've really got digital at the heart. So I think the opportunity that in this particular space is really key, is that how do you become relevant enough to be digital, to enable or to support or define what digital at the heart means. So I'm not interested particularly in putting digital veneers on analog businesses.
Yeah, sure.
I'm really interested in working for an organisation that wants to be digital at the heart. And we've got that opportunity at Sydney Water, there's no doubt.
And this is an interesting thing, because if the whole industry is changing, what does that mean for the technical professional? Because historically, they were, maybe techno geek is a tough old term, but some of them love the term. They love being called geeks. They were that person in the business. But now we're saying that not only have they got to be technically professional, but they also have to start becoming more tactically or strategically minded, and also people person. How do technical professionals go through that metamorphosis?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think most technical people will decide whether they want to be a techno geek or not.
Yeah, sure.
Some people just want to do that, and that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, absolutely.
But if you're in a CIO role, or you are a technical function or a digital function within a large organisation, too much of that thinking and you will become irrelevant.
Sure.
I'm much more interested in how do I nurture the people that say I want to make a difference to the company. I want to be at the heart of transformation. I want to shape the future. I want to be relevant into the future. How do you tap into that is a challenge for some people. What I find is if you can start to talk a language, and I use storytelling in order to break the ice on many of these things, but if you can start to talk a language which is, don't describe what I do, start to describe what impact I have, or what contribution I make, or what difference I could make, or what disruption I could introduce that will change the nature of the organisation. Yeah. And that's really exciting, but it's an opportunity and a threat.
So let's talk about technical professionals. How do you lead technology professionals, maybe in any different way, or what's different to leading normal or other people, other professionals, specifically about technology professionals?
So technology professionals tend to know an awful lot about how things work.
Sure.
But they don't often understand about what the impact of those things are, or what how those things could change the nature of an organisation. So I'm not as motivated to lead a group of technologists that just want to run technology. What I am interested in is how do we apply technology to create business impact or transformation or disruption. So leading a group of technology professionals is moving them from a what do I do to what is the impact of what I do. And that comes back to some of the things that we were talking about before, which is I need to make them understand what their contribution to an outcome is. I ask them to do things that they haven't traditionally done.
Yeah, I think that's very good. That's very interesting, in fact. And I, as you know, I've got a technology background as well, and I can see exactly what you mean by that. Okay, let's go back to your career a bit. We've gone around in circles, but that's the way the inner chief works. Now, listen, you ended up at Wessex Water, and you were in a role there, but it didn't end in a way that you wanted it to. Can you tell us that story and what you learned from it?
Yeah, so an opportunity came up to be the sort of CIO at Wessex Water, and I loved it. I spent 3 great years there, but it's a pretty difficult role, CIO. And the chairman is an amazing guy, very long tenure in the water sector in the UK, and I really enjoyed working under him. But there were a couple of projects that were quite difficult, that we never quite made the ground on that we should have, and it was frustrating a couple of my key stakeholders in the business. And when we weren't making progress in this area, and I had an amazing team who were really going the extra mile for me, but there was a couple of things we just weren't making progress. Anyway, this particular person got in the ear of the chairman and said, I could do a better job than that. I understand the business. Technology is easy. I understand the business. I'll do a better job for that. Anyway, the net result of that was I was called into his office one day and he said, I think you're really good at strategy. I think you're really good at setting a vision, but I need somebody that will get delivery done. And I'm convinced this other person will do that. So within a heartbeat, what I found was that my role had been reduced by something like 70%. So I had a role that you could generally describe as strategy, operations and delivery of new capability.
Sure.
I suddenly found myself with operations and delivery taken away from me. I was asked to shape future strategy. At that point, I could have sat back, stepped away from all the difficult parts of this role and taken this beautiful job in strategy. No change to conditions, anything else, working for a guy that had real vision. And I could have been okay with that. But the problem I had was this decision was made without consultation. And I felt that there was a break of trust. And at that point, I'd been there 3 years, and I'd done enough to convince myself I'd made a good contribution. But I suddenly felt there's a break of trust here, and I don't know how I'm going to recover from that. So I thought about it for a while, and I said, you know what? This is a good indicator for me to go and find a new challenge. So I gave this decision my blessing. I supported the whole transition, but I had to go and find something else. I could not just be a strategy guy. I wanted to achieve things through people, and I didn't want to let go of that. So I decided to resign. At that point, there was a bit of a shock, and I was tried to convince to stay, but it was just that break of trust was the problem with me. And I thought, no, I'll find something else, but I'll support transition with this other person. 12 months later, they were seeking another CIO because the difficulty had come out. But if I hadn't have made that decision and I stayed true to my values, true to my principles, I wouldn't be here today in Sydney working for an amazing guy and an amazing company in Sydney Water. So I don't regret it, but I am really comfortable in the fact that I made a decision based upon what I thought was right for me at the time. So my absolute blessing to Sydney Water, to Wessex Water, amazing company. But I did a little bit of consulting, and then I realised that an opportunity was surfacing here in Sydney, which was an amazing opportunity that we can talk about.
I want to pick up a point there, George, because it points out that even when you make it to the top, the boardrooms and executive roles can be brutal. Things can happen fast. It can be like shuffling deck chairs a lot of the time from one company to another. One person leaves, it like a domino effect, and 5 people leave in an executive team. I see it with all sorts of clients of mine over the years. The key then in those moments is, do you stay true to your values and who you are and what makes sense? And if you can, then you can operate at the top, not have sacrificed your values and what makes you tick. And you've just given a perfect example of that, and in the end you're rewarded for it because now you get to live here in Australia, which is way better.
Yeah. Well, the weather's certainly way better, but so is the role. So is the role, because I just felt at that time I struggle to apply myself if my heart isn't in it. Now I like that in myself, but what it does do is it exposes you. You know, my heart is visible on my sleeve at all times. I hurt. I hurt. You know, I haven't got a robust outer skin here. My heart is exposed. And what I found with that, what happened at Wessex, was there was a break of trust, and whatever Wessex did next would never win my heart. And I knew that if my heart wasn't in it, I'd never be successful in doing it. And that's the value that I had to stay true to. Yeah. But as I say, I found myself here in this amazing city.
Yes. Righto, Chiefs. More from George in a minute. Now, recently I spoke to Kate Newey, HR Chief of Adaptalift Group. We spoke about the secret life of HR professionals, having it all, and AI in the workplace. Here's what Kate had to say about the perception of HR in the world.
I would probably say, and this would be a lot of professions that have this happen, but you go to a barbecue and someone asks, oh, what do you do? I work in HR. And what happens next is they have this full out-of-body experience. Oh, you're one of those people. And I have to follow it up with, oh, no, I'm not that HR. It's okay, I promise. But you can't not validate the feelings that a lot of people have about their own experience in dealing with HR in their different organisations.
You can listen to that fun and insightful conversation with Kate Newey by going to chiefmaker.com/370. And while you're there, you can subscribe to the podcast and check out all the other great interviews with our chiefs and gurus, as well as all the minisodes by going to chiefmaker.com/listen now. Righto, Chief, let's get back to our Best Of series with George Hunt. Right, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about non-tech stuff. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
What's the most important part of your routine?
Yeah, I was thinking about this question because the most important part of my routine is to actually have a constant ongoing dialogue with the people that are going the extra mile for me. So I'm really keen on Sydney Water operates a manager once removed process.
Yep.
That allows me to be very connected to two layers of the organisation, my direct report and their direct reports. So I'm very, very focused on maintaining a routine around keeping connected to the leadership group, the extended leadership group. But equally, I also make a big effort to try and communicate with people frequently. I know people's names. I go out of my way to understand what makes somebody tick. I know when people are under pressure fairly well, so I make sure I go and support them, create an environment that makes them successful. And that's a big part of who I am. So even the little things, I was told recently on a course I went on about doing the little things right, as opposed to the big grand gestures. You know, and those little things are simple things like knowing somebody's name.
Oh, yeah.
You know, saying hello, saying goodbye, saying thank you. Friday, the end of the day on Friday, I always walk around the floors of where I am in the Sydney Water building, just telling people to go home or asking why they're staying late or just saying thanks for doing what you're doing. And simple things like that, they just pay you back in bucket loads. You know, so a big part of my routine is, even though I have to engage with the exec a lot and we have to spend a lot of time discussing some pretty difficult issues, I never ever lose touch with the people that are actually going the extra mile for me. And there's lots of them. There's lots of them.
What about mentors in your career? Have you had any really important mentors, and what did you learn from them?
I think there were three that come to mind. The first one I mentioned earlier, which was the managing director of the Petrofina business I worked for, John Wolf. He taught me very, very quickly the power of winning hearts and minds and talking to people, the power of people, as opposed to being... I guess what I would describe is the difference between a leader creating followers and a manager telling people what to do. And I knew at that point, and this was a fair while ago, I knew at that point that I wanted to be the sort of person that could create followers or the sort of person that could follow a great leader. You know, and that being on that side of the leadership versus management kind of spectrum became really important to me very quickly. So I would say he was the first one. The second one was a project I did with GlaxoSmithKline, and I worked for a guy who was utterly ruthless. He was utterly ruthless in terms of wanting to achieve. But what he did do is he taught me very quickly about if you focus on an outcome, you try and work out what contribution everybody needs to make to that outcome, you can achieve amazing things. So he was a little bit different. Rather than convincing people to achieve something, he was basically, let's keep our eye on the outcome and let's keep true to that goal and let's all work together to achieve an outcome, which is a little bit more analogous to a sporting team saying it doesn't matter how you win a game, whether you win it with flair or you win it ugly, it's about winning.
Yeah, sure.
You know, and I follow rugby like you do, Greg, and, you know, an ugly win is still a win. You know, so that she was another person who I really respected. The third one is a simple one for me, and, you know, it's somebody I know you hold in massive high regard as well, which is Kevin Young. He's a remarkable guy. Everybody who comes into contact with Kevin will just go the extra mile for him without question.
He was episode 1 of The Inner Chief.
He was episode 1, and and it was a great interview. And I've got this amazing privilege now to work for Kevin, and that's going to be a defining moment in my life, or defining period in my life while I'm doing that.
Fantastic. Well, let's talk about the final questions that all chiefs have to answer. You ready?
I am.
What's the next thing in life you're most excited about?
Okay, so we've got a number of ongoing programs in Sydney Water. One in particular has been a 3-year program to get to a successful outcome. Very high stakes. I'm really looking forward to seeing the team that has put their heart and soul into this succeed. The outcome is really important, but actually what I'm really, really excited about is how that outcome is going to make this group of people who've absolutely gone the extra mile succeed. And I can't even begin to tell you what that will mean to me.
Yeah.
Just to see people grow professionally, grow in their confidence, and set themselves up for something really special in the future for them. But, a byproduct of that will be a great outcome for Sydney Water as well.
Sure.
But it's really the people journey that has really caught my attention there. So I'm really excited about that. I'm sad about Kevin Young retiring, but equally I'm excited about being presented with a new opportunity to support the new person who takes over Managing Director of Sydney Water. So that's exciting too. And I'm excited about the evolving role of the CIO. It's tough being the CIO because there's a real narrative around there's the business and IT, and they're two separate things.
Yes.
So if I'm going to use the #1 CIO of Australia tag for any value here, it's actually to promote the role of a CIO in the organisation. You're not the technical guy in the room or the technical woman in the room. You're actually somebody that is actually at the heart of the future of this organisation, and you've got a voice and you've got a contribution to make. So I'm really excited to see how the role of the CIO evolves over the next few years. I think there are already more examples of CIOs having a seat at the executive table, and more technical people on boards, or digital people on boards.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited about seeing how that evolves over the next few years.
How can people connect with you, George?
I'm quite active on LinkedIn.
Yes, you are. Yep.
I like people knowing what I like, so I do like a lot of stuff. I like stuff that is touching human emotion.
Yep.
I like hearing stories about people that have been successful. So I use LinkedIn quite a lot, and I never refuse a connection.
Good stuff. Can you nominate another chief or guru you hold with great respect you think should be on the Inner Chief?
Yeah, so I haven't asked this person, but
That's all right, dob them in.
I had the privilege of working with a guy that was the Government Chief Information and Digital Officer for New South Wales. He was the first appointee in that role.
Wow. Yeah.
His name's Damon Rees. Now he moved, the reason I'm interested in Damon is he moved from being a CIO to now being the CEO of Service New South Wales. So he made that jump, moving out of what would be seen as a technical role into a role that is now delivering a core service to the citizens of New South Wales. Now I'm quite interested in what we can all learn about how he made that jump.
Sure, yeah.
And I would recommend a conversation with Damon.
It's an unusual pathway to the top, but as you say, it does happen.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like some HR professionals going the HR route to the top. It does happen, right?
Yeah.
So that's wonderful. We'll try and track him down. Now, if you could lead any company in the world other than Sydney Water, what would it be?
Well, before I joined Sydney Water, it's a little bit of a digression, but I will answer your question as quickly as I can. I applied for a role before I joined Sydney Water as the CIO of Macmillan Cancer in the UK, which is the equivalent of Cancer Council here.
Yeah.
Now, the pay wasn't great, the conditions weren't great, but my mum sadly passed away of cancer, and most people have somebody in their life impacted by cancer. And I just thought, I just want to do something valuable in the third sector.
Sure. Nice.
So if I could choose where to go from Sydney Water, I'd quite like to find a role in the third sector or in the not-for-profit.
Yeah, not-for-profit.
Yeah, because I like the idea of making a contribution that is not based upon your reward and recognition. It's based upon your contribution or the difference you make. When you asked me that question, the other company came to mind would be the World Wildlife Fund. Something like that. Yeah. But I really like the idea of the third sector or the not-for-profit sector, partly driven by the fact that you have to make a contribution with limited resources. And I find that quite a challenge.
True.
I'm blessed with great resources in my current role.
Yeah.
I'd like to have a challenge where I have to be really innovative about how to achieve an outcome.
Yeah. Nice, I like it. Okay, what is your final message of wisdom and hope you think is vital for the next generation of executives?
So I think all I really have to offer here is kind of what's made me tick over the years, and I feel quite comfortable that I've stayed true to my values in all the decisions that I've made. It's very easy for your moral compass to be messed around with in large corporations. You know, you suddenly realise you're not living up to your values, or you're not staying true to what you believe in. So my words of wisdom, I suppose, for what they're worth, would be, you know, really know who you are, know what you stand for, know what you believe in, and stay true to them. And you know, opportunities will come your way, and there'll be opportunities that are aligned with those values. Rather than you seek the opportunity and to realise the opportunity, you have to compromise your values. I feel very comfortable around the story I told you with Wessex. I stayed true to my values. It doesn't make the decision to do what happened wrong on Wessex side or my side, but I'm very comfortable I stayed true to my values. So my advice for anybody that I'm mentoring or anybody that I come into contact with is really know who you are and stay true to your values and what you believe in. And, you know, great things will come your way.
True, they will. George Hunt, it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
You're welcome, Greg. Thanks very much.
Chiefs, that sums it up for this week with my old mate, George Hunt. What an absolute legend who's now forging his path over in the UK. Chiefs, I encourage you to check out all the show notes. They can be found at chiefmaker.com/371. And if you would like to stay in touch and hear all about some of the best resources you can find anywhere in the world to improve your performance at work, go to chiefmaker.com/subscribe. Now, Chief, if you're yet to rate the episode and subscribe, I hope you'll do so soon. It helps others see the magnificent value that the chiefs and gurus bring to their life and career. So make sure you hit subscribe on your podcast app now, give it a 5-star rating if you think it's worthy, and leave a short review about your favourite episode. Righto, Chiefs, as always, remember to stay epic.